and welcome to a new Squirrel Views. This video is on my personal top 10 list of horror novels or novellas. Previously done the top 10 horror movies, and there may be connections. Let's see, by diving in and starting with number 10, The Transition of Titus Crowe by Brian Lumley. Now, this is actually the second book of the Titus Crowe series, after the first one, The Burrowers Beneath, and it was a Cthulhu mythos series that I really enjoyed. Modern Cthulhu mythos, even though it's not actually modern, it was just modern as in when it was published, compared to sort of Lovecraft and his cronies back in the 20s. But it is set in the past anyway. But interestingly, the last book of the series, Elysia, is I've never read. Basically because despite actually enjoying the Titus Crowe series so much, Brian Layman had two other actually series of Cthulhu mythos. There was a Dreamland one, and I can't remember what the name of the other one was. But there was two other Cthulhu mythos series, not as many books as the Titus Crowe series, but I never managed to get them all. So I never got around to actually reading any of them because I never got to actually finish the collection of the other two series. And some of the characters from those series are in the last Titus Crowe book. So I couldn't read the Titus Crowe book until I'd read those series. So I particularly enjoyed the second one, Transition of Titus Crowe. It's a really good series, but I don't know what the last book's like because I never got around to reading it because I never got read the other series. At number 9 we have Children of the Night by Dan Simmons. This is one of those, it's an odd thing because when I actually think of horror novels, it's one that actually comes to mind. So it's there in my memory. Actually, I can recognise the front cover of the book. So it must mean that it's actually stuck in my actual memory for some reason. And so I mean, any horror novels, I suppose it's the same with visual media with films. If there's any particular film or book that actually sticks in your memory, there's got to be a good reason for it. Not necessarily. I mean, sometimes films and books can stick in your memory because they were utter crap. But generally speaking, when you're thinking about what did I enjoy reading in the past, and if it's something that comes to mind, then you must have enjoyed it. And that's one of those books that does come to mind when I think back about horror novels that I enjoyed. In a similar way to the number 8 on the list, Demonic, by Stephen Laws. I've read a few Stephen Laws books, including Chasm as well. And these other books are good, but I mean, none of them seem to actually reach the same height as Demonic for me. Technically, the front cover of the book doesn't tell you anything, which is pretty good. But I mean, technically, it's an old trope of family members or whatever being invited to a haunted house, and anyone surviving the night inherits, kind of old horror trope. But it's done in actually a really interesting, nice, really good way, kind of haunting way as well. The way that the interior of the geography of the interior of the house, changes constantly keeping them off guard. So you can't follow a logical path because there's no logical path because the house is constantly changing that logical path. But he does it in a way that's really interesting and really compelling. So you just draws you in even more. So yeah, highly recommend that one. And then number 7 is Psycho by Robert Bloch. Now, I mean, it might have come as a surprise to some that the film, the Alfred Hitchcock classic Psycho, didn't appear on my top 10 horror films list, but it just missed out. I'm sure most people doing the top 10 horror movies of all time would probably, there's a good chance they'd have Psycho in there. But I mean, if you've seen the film and enjoyed it, and as for the full colour remake, just avoid. It's terrible. But it's well worth reading the book. The book is really good. Obviously, it's one of my favourites. But even if you haven't seen the film or read the book, then if you get the chance, read the book before seeing the film. Which is the case with many things, because you can put a lot more into a book than you can a film. One of the best examples, one I really enjoyed, was the novelisation of the Star Trek 6 Undiscovered Country, where the bit of there was the bit at the beginning where the book started at a point where the Klingon warbird that could fire while cloaked was attacking outlying Federation bases, and one of them happened to be a medical station where Carol Marcus, actually Kirk's old fling, apparently in the book they suggest that they have actually rekindled their relationship, but obviously he's doing his thing and she's actually on this base on the edge of Federation space, and the Klingon warbird that can fire while cloak attacks that base and destroys that base, killing her. So it's not only his son's Kirk is not only dealing with his son's death, but his girlfriend's death as well. So it built on that actually anger, inside him. Anyway, let's go completely off the track. So we get to number 6 with The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from Robert Stevenson. Now, a lot of people actually look at this as just being a look into the potential primordial bestial nature that still actually rages within us and that we could actually tap into if we wanted to. But also you could actually see it as an interesting look, well, a rather horrific way of looking at multiple personalities. Obviously, I mean, even though that obviously Mr. Hyde is a personality that is only brought to the front by actually the drinking of a potion, but other than that, you could see it as actually, and it's a classic of the Victorian Edwardian horror genre, gothic horror, and up there, I feel it's I enjoy it more than Dracula or Frankenstein, which are both good books, but so we get halfway through our list with number 5 and Phantoms by Dinar Kuntz. Now, this was interesting because I did end up, it was the first Dinar Kuntz I read, and I started reading it and was drawn in straight away and ended up finishing the book, and started reading more actually Kuntz because of it. But then there was a particular period in the 90s where a lot of horror writers. Horror as a genre seems to be, particularly in books, on a downward trajectory, and they weren't selling well. So a lot of horror writers basically abandoned the genre and went into sort of this dark fantasy stuff, and it just wasn't as good. It's not horror anymore. And some people who want horror still want horror. They don't want dark fantasy. And so Dean R. Koontz started doing that. I'm putting the R in there because basically when he went over to doing all the dark fantasy stuff, he dropped the R and just became Dean Koontz. So yes, I mean, but Phantoms I really got into and really enjoyed. Number 4 is another one which is related to a film anyway, but The Howling by Gary Bradner. I had 3 or 4, I think it was 4 of the novels. There was certainly the trilogy I had, and really enjoyed and still do today. As far as fiction is concerned, I think it's one of the best, certainly werewolf fiction books out there, werewolf horror. The Cycle of the Werewolf by Stephen King is a pretty good one if you're interested. If you can get hold of that one, it's worth it, a deep dive. But for me, I mean, film-wise, it's difficult because both The Howling and American Werewolf in London both came out at a similar time, and yes, there was some comedy in the American Werewolf in London, but it was really good. But I think because The Howling stuck to its horror roots, it didn't try to be anything else. It was really good. As a teenager, I used to love watching the Howling films as well, even the ones that are actually considered as really bit poor. Like the Australian one where it's basically where dingoes, basically. But yeah, I mean, I still enjoy the book. At number 3, we get Ring by Koji Suzuki. Yes, the very same Ring as the Japanese film. As soon as I saw the film and I got the DVDs of Ring 2 and then Ring O, and yeah, Ring 2 goes to actually some strange places, and then Ring O is supposed to be a prequel, and yeah. I mean, I still enjoy them, even though they don't really, the sequel and the prequel are not great. But, I mean, obviously, Ring, the original Japanese Ring film is one of my favourites. And I also, got the book by Koji Suzuki when I could, and I loved it. And I've also got the sequel, which is not called Ring 2, which is called Spiral. And I still need to get the third one, and I can't remember what the third one's called. Also, strangely enough, Dark Water as well, which was also turned into a film. That's another Koji Suzuki that I want to get the book of, because there was a lot of Dark Water became popular again, at least the film, after the Elisa Lam events, because the fact that there's a very similar plot where it's to do with this woman and her daughter living in a hotel, and the water suddenly starts going darker and tasting funny, and it's discovered that it's being caused by actually a body in the water tank. So yeah, after the Elisa Lam stuff, the Dark Water film got a lot of viewings and stuff at that point. But yeah, I mean, if you've seen the film or even the American remake, you know what it's like, and the book is really good, even if it's a Japanese translation. I still enjoyed it. And number 2 is Beast House by Richard Layman. Again, this is like the transition of Titus Crowe, this is actually the second in a series. Although the actual series is called the Beast House trilogy, or it is actually 4 now, I do believe. But again, Richard Layman was one of those that I found late on, and I think the Cellar, which is the first part of the Beast House trilogy as it was then, was my first introduction. No, it wasn't. It was the second book I actually read of Richard Layman's, actually. There was another one I read, I can't remember the name of it. But as a writer myself, it was similar to, I found that he had a similar way of writing as I do, where the first scene in the book is something that's supposed to grab the attention of the reader and pull them in and make them want to actually read further, and that's what I had with Richard Layman, and that's how I got into the Richard Layman books. Ended up buying more than 20 of them after reading the first one, including the Beast House trilogy. And like I said, the Cellar, which is the first one of the Beast House trilogy, was the second book of his I read, and Beast House was the second. And so yeah, I mean, if you like horror and you've never read Richard Layman, I suggest choose any of them, any of the single novels, or if you're interested in getting into the series, get the Cellar and Beast House and start from there. Which brings us to the number one. And the number one is The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. I mean, how could you possibly have a top 10 list of horror novels and not have Clive Barker in there somewhere? He is an absolute master. I will mention at this point, before continue with Hellbound Heart, another one that kind of just missed off the list. James Herbert is another good British writer, horror writer, and particularly well known for his Rats trilogy, which is actually a quadrilogy, but not many people know that. I used to have, I mean, the Rats, the Lair and Domain are the 3 main novels, but I used to actually own a copy of it's quite difficult to get hold of now, it's quite expensive on eBay, The City, which is the 4th story in the series, but was released as a graphic novel. So if you can get that, and as well as the Rats Lair Domain, it is well worth it. But yes, back to Hellbound Heart and Clive Barker. Of course, I mean, again, it's another one of those that many people would be surprised that the film Hellraiser wasn't on my top 10 list. As I said at the time when I was doing that video, asked me on a different week, and it'd be different. The list would be different, and sometimes Hellraiser will be in there. I would say all of them, but I don't, because after Hellraising 3, or at least Hellraising 4, Bloodlines, it's diminishing returns, and the sequels are really, really bad after that. So the first one's good. The second one at least continues on from that, but there is issues. The third one is still entertaining, but that's really when the actual rot started in, with the fact that Pinhead and the Cenobites just basically were treated like demons, completely forgetting the actual line that Pinhead says, demons to some, angels to others, pleasure and pain indivisible. It's supposed to be the ultimate. They are actually not just demons, hell demons. They are to do with pain and pleasure and the combination. It's the ultimate S&M trip and stuff. And the films lose that, but if you've seen any of the films, anything, if you haven't seen the first four and you've seen any from 5 to 9, sorry, they are terrible and get worse as you go down life. And then you had the travesty that was Hellraiser Judgment, which I don't have and never will, which was not Hellraiser and was really terrible. So if you have seen any of the first three, or if you've seen all three of the first three, then that's fine. And you haven't read the book, then definitely read the book. And if you're a horror fan and haven't read the book, read the book and find other Clive Barkers, because he is a master. And that completes my list. So if there's any books that are favourites of yours that I didn't mention, pop them in the comments below. Same with the horror films. I mean, if I got enough comments on both horror films and the horror novels, I would do a top 5 or top 10 list of your books as chosen by you. But in the meantime, this is Detective Squirrel out.